Hello, everybody. We are back with episode 81 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm always so happy that you've decided to put us in your podcast listener app of your choice. And as always, I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Eric. Excited for this week's episode.
Me too. I know you've been doing a bit of a business travel lately, so welcome back. Glad everything's working out well for you there. But life never settles down for a consultant in this space, right?
Nope, not quite, which is a good thing.
That's right. The more the better, as they say. Well, and I'm very happy to say with this particular issue, I want to give a special congratulations to our newest curator, Sam Parmer, for his very first Our Weekly issue curation. And so, Sam, awesome job, my friend. He's a very sharp guy. I actually know him a bit personally, so it was gratifying to see him contribute to our team. He's already been a immense help, and we're going to dive right into this issue today. And as always, Sam had great help from our weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world. Mike, I'm not going easy on you this time. I'm going to put you on the spot right away here. Here we
Uh
go. Buckle up, buddy. So,
oh.
if I told you that there was a time in R's history where key developers within the R community were looking to enrich R with the ability to create intuitive graphical user interfaces which tapped into existing toolkits but had native R functions serving as the abstraction layer to those toolkits, what do you think that effort led to?
Whew, I don't know. Maybe TCLTK?
Wow, you are a great historian of it. I thought you were going to say shiny.
I was thinking shiny. I thought this might have been a trick question.
Yeah, you know me too well. Now, the thing is, they're both correct. But what we're talking about for the first highlight is that this kind of conversation was happening way back in 2001, which is a long time ago by tech standards. But yes, indeed, Peter Delgard, one of the earliest R Core members, was exploring opportunities to create graphical user interfaces within R, and he didn't want to invent a brand new toolkit to do it. He wanted to see what was out there in the community. And that's where he did settle upon TCLTK. And it had already been used by other languages at the time, such as Perl and even the early stages of Python, to give what I'll call a native language, its own kind of DSL language, if you will, to create these interfaces. And so Peter thought, well, why not put an R wrapper on top of that? And that's how the package in R called TCLTK was born. And you might be wondering, well, whatever ended up happening with that? Well, back in those early days, there were some interesting GUIs that were produced in R with this at the backbone. One of which that I remember pretty well from my very early days of R, interface called R Commander, written by John Fox many, many years ago, that gave R a way to turn it into almost like an SPSS like interface where you had menu options and other configurations to run some of the basic statistical analysis models or inference tests and the like. Well, let's fast forward, obviously, to maybe say about 10 years ago. Shiny was born. We all know the impact of Shiny by now, especially if you've been listening to Mike and I on this podcast routinely. And also in the general tech sector of, web applications, often backed by JavaScript. Certainly that has taken a lot of the mind share in terms of GUI development, where you can run these on your computer, but more broadly, these can be deployed on any web service, and you can give just a simple link to somebody, and then they can experience these applications themselves. Well, it wasn't like that back in the old days, but what's interesting is that what's old is new again, so to speak. So, in our first highlight today, no stranger to these highlights in the past, Mike FC, affectionately known as Cool But Useless, went down a very interesting adventure here. Where it was about a month ago, he reached out on Twitter with the RStats hashtag and wondered what kind of happened before Shiny in terms of graphical user interface development. And a few ideas were thrown out there, and one of them was TCL/TK. Now, I'll be polite in saying that these interfaces built with the TCL/TK kind of have their, you might say, prehistoric look to them. They're not exactly styled with CSS libraries. You kind of know it when you see it. But Mike FC thought, why not take a modern approach to this? Can we take this in a different direction? Well, he has, and that's how the package Tickle has been born, which we're going to be talking about in this highlight today. And so, what Tickle is aiming to do is to basically be that abstraction layer on top of TCL/TK, but give a more friendly interface to some of the more common operations for user interface design. This should sound kind of familiar because that's kind of like what Shiny's trying to do. But I'm happy to say that Tickle does have, even in my first explorations of this that I did the other night, pretty intuitive ways to start getting up and running quickly with building your first interface based with Tickle. So, Mike, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about kind of the backbone of Tickle and kind of the functional paradigm that it exposes to our users here.
Well, I might have to ask you a little bit more about the backbone because I'm not 100% sure. So Shiny, was built to do this rendering of the UI in the browser, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
And this TCL Tickle, is that not necessarily rendering in the browser? Is that rendering someplace
So it's
else?
basically rendering with the TCL/TK toolkit on that person's computer. So it's no browser involved here. It's just simply a different toolkit. And I think what Mike FC has done here is he's kind of seen like what I saw, that if you just write something to that TCL/TK package itself, nothing against it, but it's a little bit difficult to navigate with its functional paradigm. So what I'm seeing here is that there's some nice wrappers on top of it that Mike FC has built, but still at the backbone of it, much like how Shiny has, JavaScript and React kind of at its backbone. Tickle itself has the TCL/TK tool. Everything's done locally on the computer system or the user's computer locally, and there's no web browser involved with this.
So I guess that leads to like an interesting potential conversation getting back to Shiny, like maybe desktop apps
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to right. So yeah, it's very very interesting. I think we're still pretty early in Mike's exploration of this, but he's starting to put together some pretty cool developments in terms of our packages that he's developing and exploring. This is version 0.1.1, and it's really comprised of four different families of functions. Tick underscore functions, TIC, for nested creation of a UI that looks a lot like how you would nest UIs in Shiny. It's not that far off. Render UI, which is the function, I guess, is the exact same name as what you would get if you were developing Shiny to render that UI spec that you created into a window on screen. Then reactive underscore family of functions to create reactive values. This is all sounding very Shiny like, used to transfer values between the UI and R. And then canvas underscore family of functions to do some simple drawing and manipulation on canvas widgets. There's some really nice documentation on the package down site for Tickle, including a section called containers, which shows the different UI layouts that are available, as well as a section called widgets, which shows the gallery of the different widgets that are available in the package. And you have all the usual suspects like radio buttons, checkboxes, text boxes, sliders, all the different widgets that you could want. It does look a little, you said you were going to be nice and then you called it prehistoric. I mean, when are leveraging Bootstrap 4 and 5 and Shiny like we have with the ability to do with BSLib nowadays, it's not comparable to what you're getting in terms of UI from stuff like this. But I could see we're just at the beginning of this ecosystem, so who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah, and I do credit Mike FC for trying to theme it up a little bit on kind of the underpinnings to make it take some of the nicer elements of, you might say, modern design. Now, you can only do so much. I mean, he's definitely gone pretty far with this, and it sounds like he's not slowing down anytime soon. But I think there is a, like you alluded to earlier, there is a conversation to be had about kind of where does this fit in the bigger picture. One key point that we did allude to is that this is not meant for like a browser based deployment. This is meant to be run on somebody's own installation of R, because you literally need to launch R and then launch whatever functions are producing this interface that you're making with Tickle. So that can be both an advantage and a disadvantage, perhaps. Now, we have seen some people ask, some of you ask me or others personally on Twitter or other venues about how do we best, say, deploy, you might call a self contained Shiny app. So that instead of somebody going to a browser that's served up by something like Shiny Server or RStudio Connect or Shiny Apps IO, that they could run that app locally on their machine. There aren't great I mean, there have been attempts at a solution to this. We're not quite there yet. And I actually know one of the authors of one of those solutions. So shout out to Chase Clark for his work with Electric Shiny or Electric Shine. It's not quite there yet, and he admits it's a lot of things to jump through. So perhaps something like Tickle is good for that situation where you know you're not meant to deploy this to the World Wide Web or like a general web server. You just want somebody with an R installation to quickly boot up a GUI and do stuff with it. Perhaps that's the best place for it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and maybe right now it would be just for some sort of a small job to I don't know, move a file from one place to another, or to just click on a file, take a look at the data in a ggplot or something like that. I don't know how production you could get with Tickle, but like I said, the way that the widgets line up in the Tickle package with a lot of the stuff that we get in Shiny, you have the ability to, I think, select files on your local computer, just like we have the ability to do in
Right.
Shiny. You even have the ability to, there's a widget that lets you pick a particular color, which might, on like a hex palette, that might help you with theming and things like that. So there's some interesting features here.
Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for the engagement on the community for this, because I'm always kind of on the lookout for other capabilities to provide interfaces if there is a use case for it. Now, yeah, in my day to day production, probably not, but I could see this as an interesting exercise from a technical standpoint to see how somebody approaches putting a friendly abstraction upon, again, I'll try to be polite here, a slightly senior toolkit that maybe wasn't really touched a whole lot about in the last, say, 5 years or so. It's still out there, still functioning, but yeah, we're obviously not exactly the most engaged community around it as there is.
It might be more cool than it is useless. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to summarize that up. There's definitely been, you might say, some interesting dialogue on social media lately about the R language itself and maybe some of its common traits. And that's actually spurred on a pretty neat, you might say, critique on the perspectives that someone might have when they're trying to learn a language. So, another good friend of the our weekly highlights is back at it again. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about what you found out about learning journey perspectives with R?
Yeah, we have a great blog from Bruno Rodriguez, who I think this stemmed from a tweet that he had put out. He wrote a blog around that tweet. And you might remember him from a few episodes ago as the author of the Chronicler package, where he walked us through the concept of monads, which we had to take our time doing. But he's back this week with a more of like a philosophical type of blog that contemplates whether or not R is a difficult language to learn. I think it's no secret that there are plenty of Twitter eggs out there who love to stir the pot and start so-called programming language wars. And a lot of these shots tend to be taken at R. And Bruno argues that R will always be arcane to those who do not make a serious effort to learn it. I think arcane is kind of a strong word, but you can't call something trash just because you don't understand it, right? That's just a really childish way to approach new things. And I think that's sort of the point that he's trying to make. And I would agree with him. I wouldn't make the blanket statement that R is easy. Yeah, I'm not sure if you would necessarily, but I think it depends on a lot of different factors. And Bruno opened up about his experience first learning R from professors who really abstracted away the language itself and literally told him, "There's no need to learn R in great detail. We're studying economics, not programming." And he talked about how frustrated he was because his teachers weren't taking the time to actually provide some education around the language itself that he, was using to do his work. And this actually resonated pretty heavily with me, as my first introduction to learning R was just a professor telling us where to download R in RStudio, providing us with some pre-written R markdown files, telling us to fill in some blanks that he left in the code, and then just click knit and send him the PDF output. And obviously, my knitter crashed like the first 3 times. I had no idea what was going on in the in the console when I was trying to knit. It was pretty overwhelming, but we didn't spend time to learn about how R or the RStudio IDE work, and it made things very confusing for me. I don't know, Eric. Do you want to reflect for a minute on your first time learning R to do a little compare and contrast?
I remember as if it was yesterday, but it was quite long ago, to put it mildly. But I had a professor in grad school that was teaching a time series course. And up to that point, my only experience had been with, yes, I'll say it, SAS from my previous school days. But then in this graduate school department, they're using this language called R. And I remember in the first homework in one of the lectures, they introduced the homework. He shared on his screen a terminal connected to R itself, gave us a couple quick snippets of code, and then just asked us to do the homework. And if we got stuck, just look up the documentation. Not exactly telling us about R's kind of, functional paradigm or how you inspect objects or inspect data sets. It was just kind of like, here's your homework. You'll figure it out. Now, thank goodness I had obviously fellow students that we could all learn together on this, especially for those of us that have never seen it before. But I dare say that wasn't the ideal way to start out with it. I would say that it wasn't until my dissertation that I really had, frankly, the time, but also the motivation to really get into how the language works. Now, did I have a lot of help along the way? Honestly, no. It was still more of a self kind of driven effort. But I think going through that exercise obviously prepared me for appreciating what we have today, for sure. So, again, much like what Bruno's saying, I didn't have the most ideal experience at first with it. But coming from somebody who, yes, I had a minor in computer science, but I still didn't really get into like these language idiosyncrasies of key differences. I still was able to learn R effectively because I had the right perspective in mind. I was going to school for statistics. R was written by statisticians for, at that time, statisticians. So once I got the hang of it, I had no issue with the way R was doing certain things. And then as I got to know it better, I figured out ways of making my experience better. But I can see where if you have a bad experience of a language at first, it might, cloud your judgment a little bit, perhaps. But to Bruno's main point, I think the time you invest in it, you also need not just the time, you also need the right perspective. And I think sometimes that gets a little lost in some of these Twitter spats that I'm seeing these days.
No, I totally agree. And I personally really think that it does come down. Well, one of the biggest things that can make or break you at the beginning of your R journey is whether or not you have somebody to help you out along the way who's maybe a little bit further along than you are.
Right.
You sounds like you did not have that, Eric. So kudos to you for getting as far as you did. And I did not have that for the first maybe year or two of writing R, and I didn't get very far And then I finally found a great mentor who really took me to the next level and helped show me how to accomplish the things that I wanted to accomplish using the language. And that's sort of the whole kit and caboodle here. I couldn't imagine going to like Rice University and having Hadley teach my stats class. Not only would I understand R much better, but I'm sure I would have understood stats a lot quicker as well. Because for me, when I can code it, I can understand it a lot better.
Right.
But anyways, back to the blog. Now that Bruno has been working with R for many years, he asked himself the question, well, how fluent does anyone actually need to be in R? Um, he essentially concludes that you should try to master the parts of R that you need.
Hmm.
If you're a data viz enthusiast, take the time to really dig into ggplot. And if you need to develop web apps in R, invest the time to learn Shiny. And I think that's a good perspective to take because we're never going to learn everything. Whether you call yourself a data scientist or a data analyst or data engineer or whatnot, I don't think it necessarily matters as long as you are learning about and mastering the particular set of skills that you need to accomplish the tasks that you need to accomplish. So, while it's anybody's opinion as to whether R is an easy or a difficult language to learn, Bruno does point out, like we've said many, many times before, Eric, there are so many resources available, both freely available or paid courses and books, but, no amount of free or paid content, like you said, will be enough if you don't actually invest the time to learn the language. There's no secret recipes and shortcuts, unfortunately. But a really cool, like philosophical, reflective blog by Bruno here. So it was nice to mix it up.
Yeah, it's refreshing to see these come through. And you might say I'm also a little bit of a historian, so to speak, because I've seen so many different, you might say, evolutions, even in the language itself, and frankly, the community around it. It's great that at least I have the chance to kind of draw back on what it was like when I was saying grad school versus now. But if you're listening to this and you're new to R and you're maybe at this point where you're kind of struggling with how to solve some issues in your learning journey, as Mike you said, please take advantage of some of the resources out there. I mean, I could spend a whole nother podcast just about that alone, but one that also comes to mind, especially if you're coming at this from the data science and statistics angle, is definitely think about joining the R4DS community on Slack. They are so supportive. I know, Tom Mock has been involved with that. John Harmon helps run some of that, and they have book clubs as well. So you can learn with others as you're reading one of these great free books that are out there, such as R for Data Science or some of the new ones that are coming out these days. Don't hesitate to jump into that. It's a welcoming community. And not to sound like that guy, but if we didn't have these communities back then, or if they were on a listserv somewhere, and I was too naive to figure out where they were back in those days. So I think take advantage of this. They're out there for a reason.
Yep. Back when strings as factors equaled true. Um, for anybody, any other nerds out there that got that one. But exactly. And I was going to second. If you didn't say it, I was absolutely going to say it. I can't second that enough. The R for Data Science Slack community.
Yep.
It's like a Stack Overflow that's friendlier, more collaborative, and specifically for R. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And also for technical help, we want to plug our studio community as well. They're also very welcoming there, especially teaching some great things that I did not know back in those days about how to get help effectively. We talked about reprexes before. That's also something you want to invest in, especially if you see where the issue is happening but you don't know how to solve it. That is an excellent way for having others help you more effectively. So great content from Bruno as always. And if you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, definitely check it out. He has some really fun videos out there that really dive into some specifics on the language and some of the adventures he's been doing with Chronicler and some of the other efforts in the past. But don't stop at that. There's a whole lot to dive into in every issue of our weekly. Some of the other things that caught my eye, I want to put a plug for certainly a very niche kind of package, but one that can serve me pretty well. A new package came out called Headliner, where it's an interesting way where if you have a metric of a result, maybe from like an inference test or a comparison of like group means or something, you get that final number. It's going to actually help you put in a little bit of automated like summary or descriptive text around that number so that you could plug that into a more automated reporting mechanism, such as maybe a box showing a metric in a Shiny app, or maybe in an R Markdown report, where depending on the data you're feeding into it, you might get like a positive or maybe a quote negative result. And you can quickly get that summary text spun up in there right away. Where before, what I would do, I would have a whole bunch of if else's, like if this result is higher than some value, do this chunk of markdown text, and if not, do this chunk. So it's kind of like a step in that direction. So again, very kind of targeted use case, but I think that's a promising package that's been authored by Jake. I don't have his last name, but shout out to Jake for putting it out there for us.
Yeah, I saw that one come across, and it's sort of like a glue like syntax a little bit, right? With the way that
Yes,
you
very much so.
specify those headlines. It looks really clean, really nice. And I don't think it's that niche. I think there's a ton of different applications potentially for that package, which is awesome. A highlight that I saw was everybody loves a good integration. So let's talk about our Studio Workbench in integrating with Azure Machine Learning Platform, which is a way to essentially utilize all your Azure resources in Azure's ML platform in terms of data and compute within our Studio Workbench instance. So for those folks that use our Studio Workbench and also use the Azure Cloud, this might be a chance to bring those two worlds together for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting development in this space. And we shouldn't be too surprised to see this for a couple reasons, but we know that Microsoft themselves has been kind of trying to invest a bit in using R in their various infrastructure. It wasn't, it seems like long ago now, but it doesn't seem that way, where they were baking R support into SQL Server. But this seems like the next step with their Azure offering to make it easy for data science teams to quickly spin up a familiar IDE like RStudio into their deployment platform. So yeah, exciting to see this.
Yeah, I've been pretty impressed with Microsoft's investments in R. They have a GitHub repo with a bunch of different R packages that help you integrate with all sorts of different Microsoft services from within R, which is nice. I know there was a data science hangout, I think, just a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago at this point, where some folks from Microsoft were talking about Shiny apps that they have developed to view, all of their compute that's running at any given time in a particular region, which is really really cool to see.
Yeah, that's gets really fun to me. I've been actually doing some stuff internally where we're trying to visualize more effectively the usage of our internal HPC cluster. But yeah, Shiny's great for that kind of stuff. We don't need to
We had to
tell me Micro I twice about that.
had to throw in some sort of a shiny plug at the end. Exactly.
Yeah, we'll never stop there, of course. But hope you don't stop reading our weekly. It's always a great issue every single week. And again, congrats to Sam for a fantastic release, and the hope of many more as he's joined our team. And if you want to get involved, we're always looking for more help on the curation side. So just head to rweekly.org. You'll find links to our GitHub page, and you'll see very clear information about how you can get lined up to join our weekly. And certainly, if you find a great blog post, package, or anything you think would be useful for the R Weekly audience to see, we're just a pull request away from our draft every week. So please get in touch with us on GitHub for that as well. Well, that will do it. We can't close up shop without telling them where to find our awesome co host here, Mike. Where can people find you online?
Twitter at Mike_Ketchbrook, KETCHBROOK. Or you can find me on LinkedIn if you can find the right Michael Thomas, I'm out there.
That's right. And of course, don't forget about Catchbook Analytics for all your data science consulting needs as well.
Thank you. Checks in the mail, as you would say.
Of course, it is. I am at the RCast, and yeah, my days are definitely spent on balancing day job with workshop prep. But I'm really excited. Our Studio Conf is coming closer, and I'm very humbled to say that my workshop is going to definitely have more than one person there. So it's getting real, as they say.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be
Yes.
awesome. Anybody that attends is going to be lucky.
Oh, well, we'll find out one way or another. But thanks to all of you out in the world for listening to us, and we will be back with another edition of our weekly highlights next week.